The Spiral of Silence. Addendum. As I'm giving you this lecture, I'm assuming you've already read the reading found in the under content in D2L on the Spiral of Silence. If you have not had a chance to read that yet, you need to go back and do it because I'm not covering the theory here. I'm just giving you a few notes that are in addition to that reading. That's why this is the addendum. So let me go over just a couple things then that we know about Elizabeth Noel Newman's theory. And by the way, her last name is Noel Newman. Her first name is Elizabeth. So one of the big questions we have about her theory, because we know that it's fairly accurate in predicting and explaining behavior, but we're not as sure about the cultural considerations. What she has identified holds very true in, say, Germany and here in the US, but we're not as sure about how much it holds up in cultures that are fairly different from each other, like Asia. So that's the big thing. We're just really not sure of the impact of culture. It is assumed, or people have thought, that if a culture is more individualistic, as say the US is, we've talked about individualism and collectivism, that there's the driving concern for being true to yourself, that those are people who'd be more likely to speak out from those who are from more individualistic cultures. Often they're more Western cultures. Versus those from collectivistic cultures, right, where there's a heavier emphasis upon compromise. But as we look at studies that have been done, say, in Asia versus those done in Europe or here in the US, we're not sure if there's much of a difference. And the reason for that is because the way that individual researchers go about testing things like speaking out, one researcher may ask, will you speak out in a group of friends? The other is, would you speak out at, say, a town hall? Those are different settings, and so we don't really have fair comparisons. So right now, we're not really sure. Though there is some indication, as we're going to talk about in this presentation, that in fact, culture may not really make much of a difference. We do know, of course, that media is rather important in the Spiral of Silence. And this is something that the chapter talks about. I just want to reiterate, is that the Spiral of Silence says that media does a lot to create a climate, to create our sense of overall what is it that people really believe in. And so that in that way it informs our quasi-statistical sense. It helps us get an impression of the world at large. What do they believe in? But this is really true of when we're talking about what I'm calling bigger issues. If we're talking about politics, we'll say, that then your sense of the media, or the message you're getting from the media about what is the common opinion or the popular opinion on a social issue, a political issue, that's when it really matters. But the media has less impact on a small group. If you're in a small group of your friends or just other classmates, and maybe you're all in the same major before class and you're chatting, and somebody starts complaining about a professor they just can't stand, hopefully it's not me, but odds are it is, and then someone else makes a similar comment about that professor, and you think, oh gosh, I must be in the minority because I actually like that professor. Okay, well there your quasi-statistical sense, of course, is really being informed by the room. But media helps to create the climate and for your understanding of these issues, and informs our quasi-statistical sense when it's things that are not about sort of what's going on in that room, not about personal or interpersonal issues, but bigger political or social issues. I just wanted to underscore the role of media there, because sometimes we blow it off. We think about it just being an interpersonal issue when it is both. It's both an interpersonal issue and also one about the way that media affects our perception of where we fit into society. So as we're talking about the Spiral of Silence, one of the things that has come about since Noel Newman first started writing about this decades ago, of course, is the online environment. And many of us have this strong sense that online people feel free to just say whatever they want and get carried away, and they say all sorts of things they wouldn't say in person. So some researchers want to know, is that true? And it's Liu and Fahmy from the Journal of Media and Communication in 2000, or Media and Communication Studies from 2011. And they just want to know, right? Online, if you're in an online group, right, the discussion board sort of thing, versus interpersonally, is there a difference of whether or not you're going to express your opinion? So they did find that when people are in online groups, they have less fear of isolation, which they said makes a lot of sense because you go into an online group probably to be among people who are like-minded. So if, say, you believe that marijuana should be legalized in your state, you're going to probably feel less sense of isolation when you go into a discussion board that's about the legalization of pot. It's not because everybody in there is high and they're not feeling as much. No, it's because they're in a group of like-minded people. Just as if you go into a discussion board to looking for other people who believe that, say, evolution shouldn't be taught in schools, right? You're going to experience less fear of isolation because you don't think you're going to be people are going to criticize you as being uneducated or being too dogmatic because you're going to an online group where you feel a little more protected. That said, while you feel or like to experience less isolation in that online group, within that group, when you're in that group, as you have a greater fear of isolation, you still are going to be less likely to speak out. So if in that group, say we're talking about you go into an online group on the legalization of pot because you think that's a good thing, I really have no strong opinion about it, and if I did, I wouldn't share it here, but regardless. So you go into that group, and so you might feel more comfortable talking about, yeah, why is our state so behind the times, and why won't they get with it and legalize pot? You might feel more comfortable doing that in that group. But then maybe somebody says something about absolutely, and why is it that children can't drink alcohol legally? Well, that may be an opinion that you don't share. And so regardless of the fact that you're in this group or you feel more comfortable, if there is something that makes you, if there's a time in which you fear, or if you are somebody who carries more of a fear of isolation, you're going to be less likely to speak out and respond to those people and go, whoa, that's a whole other thing. Or people say, why is it that you couldn't say, smoke pot in schools? You might be like, oh, I don't know about that. But if you have a strong sense of or fear of isolation, you're not going to speak out. So again, in the group itself, you probably have less of a sense of isolation or fear of isolation. But as much as you do experience a fear of isolation in general within that group, if they go to some place you don't agree with, you're not so likely to speak out. Right. So the other big question here is whether people are more likely to speak out online than live, and no, they're not. It's surprising. Many of us, I thought sort of anecdotally the study would have surely found that. This particular study found that actually outspokenness, right, speaking out despite what you think other people, despite whether you're the majority or minority, you don't care, you're going to speak out, right, your outspokenness is pretty common to all contexts. If you're going to be outspoken online, the person who's outspoken online is really the person who's just as outspoken standing in line to place an order at McDonald's. At the dinner party, they inevitably ruin with their political views. Right? It's outspokenness is outspokenness online or live. So sort of surprising what some of us believe is true. Now this was one study, and maybe future studies will show some contradiction to that, but that's where we are right now. Now, another way of talking about online activity, of course, is the Twitter sphere or the Twitterverse. Right? So there's a study by Miyato Yamamoto and Ogawa from the American Behavioral Sciences in 2015, and they were interested in how a person's expression of their beliefs on Twitter and how that was affected by whether or not they believe they're in a majority or not. Right? So that or Twitter, that's a so. If a person believed they were in the majority, they were more likely to speak out. Surprise, surprise. That's really the whole point of the spiral of silence. And in fact, the authors found their word is accelerates. They said Twitter accelerates people's sense of what the majority opinion is and their likelihood to conform to it. Because you don't have to wonder as much, gosh, I wonder what my friends are thinking, or the people in my network, I wonder how they feel about this. You don't really have to wonder a whole lot. All you have to do is open up Twitter and you're going to find out pretty fast. So they said, if anything, what happens is Twitter helps to strengthen conformity and to accelerate our conformity to the majority opinion because it's so easy to access it. Now, those in the hardcore, right, those who will speak out no matter, those in the hardcore, they seem to be emboldened, and the note here is, by their network. And the researchers believe that the reason that the hardcore feels so emboldened is because the list of, or the people that they have in their Twitter network, or the people that they're following, are probably the people with sufficiently similar opinions that they actually felt more emboldened than other folks did when they had a minority opinion. But for the most part in Twitter and online, if somebody feels that in the place where they're speaking that they have a minority opinion, they're less likely to express it. And if they feel the majority opinion, they feel much more comfortable opening up. So in short, the spiral of silence, so far as we're beginning to explore new applications of it, looks like it holds true perhaps cross-culturally and also into online contexts, which really means it's probably a pretty solid theory.